Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Joy Simeon. I am a doctoral candidate at Texas A&M University, and I'm also a Bill Anderson Fund Fellow. For the last 4 years, I have had the privilege of attending the Hazard Conference in Broomville, Colorado. So when I was asked to host a panel for this conference, I was both elated and a little nervous. Nervous because I did not want to mess up, of course, but elated because for the last 4 years, I've watched as so many people that I've admired and cited from afar have stood here where I am today. Elated because I stand where Bill Anderson once stood and would count on his hands how many people of color would attend this conference every year. I'm elated because I know that he's smiling today as he sees not only many diverse fellows, but now an entire diverse panel of leaders on this stage today. So again, I say I'm elated for this opportunity. Before we hear from our esteemed panelists today, I would like to first thank you, Lori, for encouraging me to lead this panel. And without further ado, I would like to present our final panel on engagement community-based approaches to expanding the hazard skill. So what do we know? We know that communities of colors have long been identified as especially at risk to a range of disaster threats. This final session will introduce a new model of community engagement focused on strengthening hazard mitigation by increasing knowledge, actionable attitudes, preparedness, and skills among historically marginalized groups, also known as CAPs. I initially designed this model over 4 years ago with one main idea: to encourage multi-hazard communities of color to prepare for a disaster. Through this pilot study, I designed a training program for the community of Geismar, Louisiana, and taught a subsample on how to prepare for a disaster. The results of the study found a change in knowledge as a result of participation in the study, and participants self-evaluated the workshop as very effective. In conducting this research, I found a plethora of gaps in knowledge among community members who live their entire life at risk of both man-made and natural disasters. And I wanted to understand why. So I started doing what I do best. I Googled and I talked to people. What I soon found is that the challenges that lie within these communities of color lie beyond just the need for disaster education, but are also the result of historical discrimination practices and systemic racism and so much more. While it will be possible for me to bring forth many of these problems and solutions in a nice presentation that outlines best practices and literature reviews, etc., I decided it would be best for you to hear directly from the source. Today's speakers will address the challenges that are often faced in at-risk communities while underscoring the power and possibilities associated with deep community engagement. The panels will be tasked with providing a brief bio of themselves. I will not introduce them. They will introduce themselves. They will be sure to explain how they originally entered into this work. They will also discuss the greatest challenges in working with marginalized communities. They will discuss their greatest impacts in working with marginalized communities. They will also discuss what they would like to see differently in community and in the workforce. And finally, they will end by providing researchers and practitioners here with advice on how to collaborate with community advocates and participate in this work. And they will be sure to discuss problems and successes with their past collaborations. While I will not be presenting the results of this study in detail today, I do encourage you to read the original CAPS article in the ISHMED journal. And I would also like to announce that the comprehensive workshop plans will be published this year by Routledge towards the end of the year and will be made available for publication, for purchase. So without further ado, please welcome our esteemed panelists, Monique Harden, Sharon Levine, Earthia Nance, and Tracy. Ms. Sharon will have to leave a little earlier, so she'll be presenting first, and then Monique will follow. So go ahead, Ms. Sharon.
Hello, can everyone hear me? Thank you for having me. My name is Sharon Levine. I'm from St. James, Louisiana, a little town on the west bank of the Mississippi River. I'm a mother of 6 children and 12 grandchildren. I'm a former school teacher. I taught school for 38 years in St. James Parish school system. I started to get involved in this work because our community is already overburdened with a lot of industry. We have 12 refineries and industries in the 5th district where I live. Our district has 7 districts. In the 4th district, we have 9. And these 2 districts are predominantly African-American districts. I started this work back in 2018 when our governor, John Bell Edward, announced a $9.4 billion industry to come into St. James and to be built 2 miles from my home. At the time I was teaching school when I heard about the announcement, and I felt like we didn't need any more because we have people over here who are dying. People are sick as I speak. People are coming up with cancer. The majority is cancer. We have air that we can't breathe for a long period of time without getting sick, without getting headaches, without getting stomach aches and other ailments. And when I heard the news, something inside of me changed. And that's when I started to form an organization. In October of 2018, I called a meeting at my home, and we had a few people there. We had about 8 people there. And since then, 2 of the members have already passed away in 2019. And then the second meeting that I called, it was in my garage. We had about 20 people there. They were ready to fight. They were ready to do something to stop Formosa Plastics from coming into our community that's already overburdened. And so I couldn't do this work without speaking to God, because the people in my community have the mindset that if the governor approved something, it's a done deal. And they also said that our public officials, the ones that we voted into office, if they vote for this infant to come in, they say it's nothing you could do about it. So when I spoke to God, God told me, he didn't tell me that. He didn't tell me it wasn't nothing I couldn't do about it. So that's when he put this fighting to me to protect the community, to protect our water, land, air, and to protect the citizens of St. James Parish. So that's when we formed the organization and we started fighting. And we asked that the governor would, if he had to put this industry, put it somewhere else, not in St. James, because we're already overburdened. He's not listening to us. When I spoke with him in 2019, he told me that he would do a health study. It's 2021, we haven't seen a health study. So I think he told me that just to brush me off so I wouldn't bother him. But he's still not trying to do anything to protect the people of St. James. After he asked for our vote in 2019, he looked like he just turned his back on us. He got the vote, got back in office, and nothing is being done about our district. And our public officials, our 7 council members, they have the power to stop this, but they won't. We have written letters to them, asked them to rescind this decision. One want to do it, but no one wants to help him to do it. So we, as citizens, we are speaking up for ourselves. We're speaking up for our lives. And we formed the organization, and some of our biggest challenges is our parish officials and our parish and our state governor. And so since they are not helping us, we're going to President Biden. We're writing him letters. I have a video that I need to send to him, asking him to save our lives. And so some of the things that we have accomplished, I can let you all know what we have accomplished so far by doing this fight since 2018. Formosa wanted to build their industry on top of unmarked enslaved graves. In last year, Juneteenth, 2020, Rise went to court. We went to court against Formosa to ask the judge to allow us to let us have a Juneteenth event on that site. The judge ruled in our favor. They were so angry with us, they brought it to higher court. The higher court ruled in our favor. So we had a Juneteenth event on the site. That's our enslaved ancestors. That's people who worked the land and died over here in St. James. So why shouldn't we have the right to go and have a demonstration on the property that our ancestors died for us? And then we also wrote letters to the Army Corps of Engineers through our attorneys. We got the Army Corps of Engineers to suspend the Formosa 404 permit. Right now, it's suspended. They cannot construct. Rise St. James got over 40,000 comments to the Army Corps of Engineering, demanding they revoke Formosa's permit. That's in the process. That was already sent. All right. We also had a letter written to the UN to condemn environmental racism in Cancer Alley. That was a big success. All right, local cities condemning the Formosa project are New Orleans, West Wego. City councils voted to pass a resolution against the Formosa project when our parish council won't do it. Biden mentioned Cancer Alley as a key injustice he would address through federal climate and infrastructure policy. That's why we sent in letters to President Biden to ask him to keep his promise. And we also, Formosa campaign has been covered widely in national and international news. It was covered in Rolling Stone, Washington Post, The Guardian, Mother Jones, Vox, NPR, and more. We organized to stop an industry called Wan Wan in 2019. That was a victory that we accomplished. Wan Wan pulled out. They didn't have the permit from the parish council until Rise St. James went to the parish council to give them information about this chemical plant, and they pulled out. So now we still fighting, and some of our goals are we want to educate our community and create to create a connection between our residents and our community. We want to change the narrative that Formosa has painted us as anti-jobs. But Rise St. James is pro-jobs, pro-green jobs. And we want to connect with the working class and change the false narrative that we are opposed to jobs for the community. We want jobs, but we want clean jobs. We don't want jobs that's going to poison our community. As we speak now, the chemical plants are all around us. They emit these things, these chemicals in the air, and it causes us not to be able to breathe. They put the chemicals, the wastewater, into our drinking water. We have to buy bottled water. We cannot drink the water. And if Formosa Plastics is built, we will not be able to breathe the air and we will not live. So I want to thank you for having me to let you know what's going on in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sharon, for sharing that story with us. I also placed an article about her work in the chat. So next we'll have Ms. Monique Harden.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Monique Harden with the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice in New Orleans. I'm going to share my screen because I have a presentation I want to show. Let's see. So a little bit about me. My family moved to New Orleans when I was about 8 years old from San Francisco. This is my home. I'm a lawyer, and I work with community-based organizations in the city of New Orleans and throughout the Gulf Coast region to improve environmental conditions as well as strengthen the resilience of communities against the climate crisis. This is hard work that we do at the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice every day with community engagement. And I really want to focus here on that work and how it connects with all of you in this field of handling and dealing with and responding to and recovering from hazards. From where I sit in my perch, we need you in this environmental justice work. And I think if you look at the way in which hazards are distributed, it's done in a way where it is racist, where there's profound and deep entrenched racial inequities. And I think to make the work of the hazards field more engaged with communities, it really needs to center racial equity and justice within it. And so I have some context and some thoughts around how that can be done. So the challenge, we have economies built on hazards. The images you see include the Mississippi River and the riverbanks along it during the days of slavery in the United States. And so this is a section of the state of Louisiana, and those green and yellow rectangular shaped areas are lands that were former slave plantations along the Mississippi River. And with the end of slavery and some 60 years after slavery, and of course the Reconstruction period, was the time when little known industrial companies like Royal Dutch Shell, like Esso, saw the important resources that they could refine and manufacture were all located here in Louisiana. And they began as small little companies in the former areas that were once slave plantations. Some of those facilities that now operate, there's some 200 now. You see this aerial view of what this area now looks like. It's now known as Louisiana's Cancer Alley. It's a vast, enormous river chemical corridor. If you can think about these green, yellow areas that were once slave plantations have really been taken over by industrial developments, all dumping waste into the Mississippi River, all moving their products out along the Mississippi River and belching millions of pounds of toxic chemicals into communities that include St. James Parish, where Ms. Levine lives, and where Rise St. James is resisting this continuation of environmental racism. But understanding that we have switched in Louisiana from slave plantations to industrial plants, I think, is an important context in terms of looking at some of the largest industrial manufacturers that really got their footing in our state in historic African American communities that were able to build after slavery. Keep in mind that I challenge anyone to identify a toxic industrial facility anywhere in the United States that operates in a place where they were welcomed by fence-line communities. And so just like slavery was an economy of brutal, violent force, this industrial economy we have now is also built on force. I mean, if you think about where people were as these industrial plants were developing, there was no individual right to vote. Right? That didn't come until many years later with a strong work of the civil rights movement. There was no community-wide, even though folks had organized communities and had an informal decision-making plan where they had a mayor, none of that was recognized as a corporation with governmental authority. And so even as a group within the community, there was no power that they could exert in terms of where these industrial facilities would be located, where they would be sited or operated. So all of this came, these economies with this, in looking at this situation of hazards, I just want to begin to populate for you that for us, hazards is connected with these issues of profound human rights violation and racism. And so what are the impacts? Environmental racism and climate injustice. And so you have some images around looking at what we have in the upper corner with the flaring of the Valero oil refinery in Black resident neighborhood in Beaumont, Texas. Across from that, a community in what used to be the historic community of African-American community of Mossville, where they put up protest signs in the form of home for sale, speaking to the contamination that industrial facilities across the street from this particular home has done to the water and the land. Down below, people being able to try to live their lives with an industrial chemical manufacturing plant just right next to their community playground where children are playing. And then the back end of all of this pollution that not only harms the health directly for folks exposed to it in the communities, but also is warming our planet. And so you have a satellite photo of Hurricane Katrina barreling towards Louisiana and the Gulf Coast region, and people in New Orleans who are crying out for rescue on the rooftop of the building in the city of New Orleans. What we try to do about this at the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice is work where the strength and where the power is, and that is in communities where the knowledge and history are. We, with Texas Southern University, the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice co-directs a project that we call the HBCU CBO Gulf Coast Equity Consortium. Of course, HBCU stands for Historically Black Colleges and Universities, and CBO is community-based organization. What this consortium brings together is community-based organizations in each of the 5 Gulf Coast states, from Florida to Texas, and pairs and partners each CBO with faculty mentors who are professors at HBCUs within their states, for the goal of working on serious problems that are priority issues identified by those community-based organizations and community members. And so I want to get into more detail about that. In the Africatown community in Mobile, Alabama, the Lower Ninth Ward community in New Orleans, Louisiana, the Pleasantville neighborhood in Houston, Texas, Wedgwood, Olive Heights, and Rolling Hill community in Pensacola, Florida, and North Gulfport communities in Gulfport, Mississippi, each with their own specific and particular challenges that they're working on through the consortium. A little bit about our structure, the pairing that I was just described is kind of mapped out here, where you can see the community-based organization executive directors with their partner faculty mentors, and then the overall direction and coordination of the program being handled through Deep South Center for Environmental Justice and Texas Southern University. Our impacts right now, we've had this project going since 2017. And with it, community-based organizations were able to do something that they couldn't do prior to the consortium, which is get the funds they needed to hire staff and organize members into community research teams and community engagement teams. Effectively and successfully persuade certain county officials to establish for the first time an environmental justice advisory council to advise on permitting decisions and zoning decisions by the county. Establish a network of community air monitors, which I'm sure you're going to hear more about from Mr. Tracy Stevens. Gain national support for historic preservation. Block a toxic development with the assistance of those HBCU faculty mentors, including Dr. Thea Nance, who serves on the consortium as a steering committee member, also taking on the role of expert witnesses in legal challenges. Pursuing policy solutions that they have researched and planned, and with our COVID-19 health and safety awareness trainings at Deep South Center for Environmental Justice, we've been able to partner, they've been able to partner with various healthcare delivery departments and organizations to provide, at the initial phase, testing sites in their communities, PPE and other supplies that were needed, and now information about vaccine and supporting and organizing vaccine distribution centers in their communities. The driving focus of the consortium is what is the focus for the communities. And what you see circled here is the outcome of a process that began with environmental justice forums we held in each of the community-based organization communities. And what rose to the top for that was vetted by community members, and you have a photo of Dr. Beverly Wright at an environmental justice forum in the Pensacola community of Wedgwood, was dealing with issues of air pollution and flood risk. Those are the 2 issues that arose to the top in terms of the vetting by each community and chosen by their community members. And so we work on those issues with the Gulf Water Justice Training Project and Training Institute that is preparing the community-based organizations on how to develop their own community flood protection plan. Rooted in all of this and guiding our work is understanding these foundational principles of people speaking for themselves, not others supplanting that with their thoughts or their ideas or their perspectives, but really being driven by communities that collaborate through working in collaboration. There's the communiversity model that was developed by Dr. Wright at the Deep South Center, which really works to change the balance so that communities can actually be independent in driving the solutions that are needed for their communities and not having researchers dictate that. And then, of course, community-based participatory research flows out of that. A little bit more about the work we do at the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice is preparing what we call human rights workers. The United Nations Environment Program recognizes that 8 million people die around the world from poor environmental conditions and environmental hazards, and that the remediation and cleanup and restoration of the environment is really a profound central core part of human rights. And so one of the things we do at the Deep South Center and have been able to accomplish is training 17,000 people from 6 states and underserved communities with certifications and skills to take on the work involving environmental remediation, environmental restoration, and now moving into green jobs and renewable energy. We also prepare young people today to be thought leaders tomorrow in climate solutions. And this is where Ms. Joyce Simeon and I met as her participation in the years of the HBCU Climate Change Conference that brings over 300 students from HBCUs around the country together to share their research, share their policy objectives and solutions and work that they're doing in communities and panel presentations and poster events during the conference, and also connect with practitioners in the field, experts, and community-based organizations who attend. We'll be having the next one this fall, October 6th through 10th. And it will be, with COVID-19 protocols, of course, as well as opportunities for presentations virtually. So I'll end there. Thank you. Joy, do you have someone you want to turn it over to? Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, you couldn't hear me. I was on mute. I said thank you, Ms. Monique, and I was turning it over to Dr. Nance.
Thank you, Joy. Let me share my screen. Can everybody see that?
Yes, perfect.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you
I
so
can
much.
see it.
Okay. Okay, so just to introduce myself. I've been an engineer as a practitioner, as well as a planning practitioner, which means that I actually carried out projects, created blueprints, designed things that were built, as well as plans. And for the last 14 years, I've been a researcher. I've been an academic working, doing mostly environmental justice / equitable flooding / environmental work in a variety of different areas, including air, water, flooding, oil spills, et cetera, mostly lots of different hazards, working with communities, working with the Deep South Center, working with Dr. Bullard at TSU. My training is interdisciplinary. I'm both an engineer, but I have a lot of social science, so that my brain is kind of balanced left and right. And I felt like that was a really important thing, to be interdisciplinary in a true sense. And my entree to doing this kind of work was when I was in my 20s. I recognized I was an engineer. I was just a regular engineer. And I recognized that my education had not trained me to understand the social implications of engineering work, or to even have the skills to work with people and to understand their situation in a way that would be effective for me to be a better engineer. And so I went back to school to get a PhD in basically in social science connected with engineering. So I have an interdisciplinary PhD, and that was my entree to getting that. So the challenges that are faced, the challenges are significant for communities. So all of the vulnerable communities that I have met are in a state of constant harassment. And by harassment, I mean, they have, like, maybe you enter the community with the issue that you want to work on, and it might be a critical issue. Let's say it's flooding. But most vulnerable communities are also dealing with pollution. They might be dealing with major health problems in the schools, crime. They could, jobs. They could have a multitude of issues that they're dealing with 24/7. That means constantly. And so it's hard to focus sometimes because they might have to go and challenge, let's say that the state elected officials are going to implement a law that's going to harm them. So now they have to stop working on air pollution and go and work against that law. And so there's a constant sense that you're in battle. And you don't have that sense when you're working in a wealthier community. You really don't. You can just focus on whatever that problem is. And so that challenge of being just harassed with different issues is very difficult. The other big challenge is that, there are instances where serious attention has been tried to be put on equity in outcomes, right? For example, hazard mitigation outcomes, to try to make them more equitable. And I have to say that even myself, I'm equity minded. I believe outcomes for life safety should be equitable. Things like drinking water, everybody should have drinking water. Flood protection, everybody should have, I believe that. And tried to implement that when I was running the hazard mitigation office after Katrina in New Orleans. I have to say, no matter what I did, and I was innovative, and I had assistance from people who'd been there longer than me, but no matter what I did, there was something about the system that the default was to create an inequitable outcome. It's been the same in Houston after Hurricane Harvey. The policy was changed to include equity. We have to use the social vulnerability index. We had the data, we had the metrics, we had the policy. 85% of the voters said, yes, let's vote for this. And we had a bond fund, so we'd have dedicated money with no strings attached. Even with all of that, it did not prevent inequitable outcomes. So we cannot, we have to really understand the systemic nature of this problem. This challenge is unrelenting. Impacts. Okay, so yes, I have trained many communities and individuals, and that's had an impact. I've had, we have many community meetings where people feel like they're now collective and empowered to work towards something together. That's an impact. Yes, worked on many plans, designed charrettes, come up with all kinds of answers to what do we want in the future, create the reports. Those are all little impacts. But I put the higher standard. The standard of the impact should be that something was built or that the pollution was stopped. We need to have, I believe, a higher level of expectation about the impact. We have a situation in some communities in Houston where they've been on the receiving end of up to half a dozen different projects, which end up with a report on the shelf and no project, nothing has been done. All of the flood risk has been identified and everything down to the block and the street level, and nothing is done. There's no money put into the project. So what I'm saying here is the standard for the impact should include the project. the workforce. I believe that community work should be paid. There's an amazing army of pro bono people that are literally just, they're not even paid to do this work. And this is work that is trying to bring some sense of protection to people who are very vulnerable. And that has a value to society. And so I believe that work should be paid. I believe that engineering education should be transformed through social science, that a massive injection of social science into the education of engineers would allow us to work better with communities and to work side by side with the social scientists. And I can speak to myself as a person who's experienced that, and that's a critical thing. And finally, a human rights framework should be applied to the hazards field. Again, this is life safety. When a person calls 9/11, it shouldn't matter that they're black, white, red, blue, or green. That's 9/11, it's life safety. I believe that flood protection, drinking water, clean air, all of those things should be in a human rights framework. That's my belief. So some advice. The impacts of urban flooding, which typically affect the more vulnerable and marginalized communities, they should be counted formally so that they can be dealt with instead of ignored. The use of property damage as a metric, for example, in benefit cost analysis, is continuing to leave out the people who need help the most. So that should be stopped. Examine the mechanisms that perpetuate inequity, the systematic aspect of it. We really need to understand that more so we can start to fix that. Document the advantages and privileges of those who profit from the current system. We need to understand better about, what's driving this? How is it actually working to constantly advantage certain segments of society? And finally, promote and fund place-based participatory research, the kind of research that Monique talked about, that Joy talked about, community-based research. And all of these ideas, these 5 sets of ideas, are in an article that I've put the link down there. You could read that article that has more about each of these 5 areas of advice. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Nance. Okay, next we'll have Mr. Tracy. Go ahead, Mr. Tracy.
Hello, everybody. My name is Tracy Stevens, born and raised right here in Houston, Texas. My background is I was born in a community called Sunnyside, which is on the south side of Houston, where it's majority Black community. And I started working at a very early age, in a very early time, where I was able to work for the City of Houston Public Works and Engineering for approximately 26 years. My background expertise goes to street paving, street drainage, street maintenance, where the group that I was with, we did this type of maintenance and work for the entire city of Houston, which is close to over 600 square miles. So, Houston is one of the largest cities in the United States. And during that time, I was able to work for 5 administrations. So there were 5 mayors with their own set of ideas, policies, rules, background that we had to adhere to during the term for 5 mayors. So I've seen the administration, the policies, the way the work went, where the work went, where the money went, how the money was used, for those different administrations of mayors during that 26 years. So other than that, I have been honored to be the president of Sunnyside Civic Club. which I left and I came back, and then it was asked of me, to take over, in which I volunteered to. And now I basically live 500 feet from the city of Houston landfill, which is currently now proposed to be turned into the largest 300-acre solar farm in the United States. So that brownfield is going to be converted to a 300-acre solar farm. And that again goes back to the advocacy of, the community and residents and politicians and fighting for over 40, 50 years about the landfill. And as Monique said, I'm also a member of the group ACTS, which is located in Pleasantville, which we have established the first community air monitoring within the community, in which we own the monitors and all of the network data. So that's another first for us in the group ACTS, which we're part of the HBCU consortium. And along with that, we've been working with Texas Southern. I've worked with Dr. Nance, Dr. King, Dr. Bullard, and it's been a group effort and a group fight. And some of the challenges are, you can see where I left, for example, my neighborhood 20, 30 years and come back and you basically have the same infrastructure. The bad streets, the bad sidewalks, the poor drainage, the poor air quality, and, lack of investments, the properties, don't look any better. So, that's always a fight for a lot of our Black and brown, low income, marginalized communities, which, we fight more than anybody else. And so, and with that, when administrations change, a lot of times they change the rules. So when you think you have a handle on it, say with one elected official, they're term limited. The next one you get in may see things differently, and you may have to start the fight over again, all over again. But to make things better, or to get things going a little better, through my experiences, I always don't focus on the elected officials. Just don't focus on elected officials. You have department heads that work under those elected officials that may be there 25, 30 years because it's their job. Elected officials are only there for a short period of time. So, and a lot of times those department heads, do not answer to elected officials. Like with Houston, they answer to the mayor. So, and mayors do change as well. But you can get those partnerships, get those relationships with those department heads, those that will actually be looking at the work, doing investigations and putting the projects together. That would be great for you to do. That's what I have done throughout the years, because I'm a hands-on, boots on the ground person. I'm on the scene, on the site, and it's always better to be there because it's a lot that you can show in a picture, but being there with the person, seeing exactly what's going on, or being there during that time of the issue or the problem, or say the flood, to actually see where the water is going, or if you're outside at that chemical plant, you can actually see where the smoke is going. That's the kind of information you need to have as well. Like Dr. Nance has stated, studies, I've known studies, I've seen studies cost $3-4 million, never implemented, sat on the shelf, dusty, and through the years, they did the study 10-15 years ago. Now it's a different time. They can't use it. It's no good because things have changed in those 10 or 15 years. So you've wasted $3-4 million on the study that could have actually been used to actually do a project or complete some work. And we have to get away from that. They have the data. They have done numerous of studies, and to me, a lot of that is just a waste. It's just a waste because the community, the residents, the people that live there, they actually know more about what's going on than some studies would ever tell you. And I've had to prove that time and time again with our elected officials, even with the news media. You have to be persistent, have them to come out and see for themselves. You know, just don't send me a picture or call me. No, you need to come out and let me show you. You need to smell what I smell, see what I see. And at this point, some of our neighborhoods, you know, you have the gentrification going on, you have the development going on for the tax money, for the tax dollars and what have you, but they're not spending the money on the infrastructure. Just like right now, the city of Houston, we've just been notified that our water bill is going to go up because of an EPA lawsuit for sanitary sewer overflows, where the administration has been passing the buck for umpteen years to not address the problem. And so now it's going to cost us billions of dollars to address it, and they passing the cost on to the taxpayers. So, you know, you have to be careful with, you know, the administration and what they're doing. You have to watch. You have to see what these projects are, what they trying to do, and what needs to be done. Because a lot of it is just smoke and mirrors and show and feathers in their hats, when actually the real projects that need to be done, you know, they're not doing it. So you're going to have to be in the trenches to fight to get it done. And a lot of it is not transparency. Transparency is the best thing, in my opinion, that you can do. Even with your community meetings, you know, tell the people exactly what's going on. Let them digest it, and then let them decide on what they want to do about it, if anything at all, and how they want to attack it. But tell them the truth. Let them know what's going on up front, because if you don't, later on, it's going to come back to bite you, because they'll remember what you said. So, you know, be careful about that, and, you know, just be honest and upfront, which at some of these community meetings, these town hall meetings that politicians have, elected officials have, some of these dignitaries, some of these representatives have, you know, they don't do that. So with that, you know, we're trying to get companies and people to come back to the communities to invest, and a lot of them, you know, is tied in to, you know, the infrastructure. You know, we need to have that put back in our communities, especially with the education and trying to get the young folks involved, because they need to be involved just as much as we do. Thank you, Ms. Joy. Thank you, panel.
Thank you, Mr. Tracy. Okay, so I'm excited because one of the things that I wanted to do with this panel was allow you guys to ask them questions. Because a lot of times we go into communities and, let me start the video, but a lot of times we go into these communities, we do the research and then we leave, but we don't get to hear directly from the people who are actually, like Mr. Tracy said, in the trenches. We don't get to hear from the community activists or the practitioners who work directly with those people. So you can put your questions in the chat, and then I'll go ahead and read them. I did see one earlier. Let's see, it was to Dr. Nance. Okay, so the question is from Natasha. It says, Earthia, I agree that all community workers should be paid, but how can pro bono services get the funding they need? What foundations, funding bodies are willing to fund this work?
So this is about making the change happen by using your own personal power to try to have it done. So many of us are constantly seeking funds. We're writing grants, we're talking to foundations. That is the moment when you say, I'm working with this community and I want your funding to include them. You start by asking. Maybe it's not going to be full-time, it'll be part-time, it'll be for a duration, but that opens the door a little bit. And then you just keep pushing that door open until it becomes the norm.
Monique, do you want to follow up on that question?
I think Dr. Nance answered it beautifully. I would just say that as part of the grant making, you should have relationships. If you're thinking about, you know, this kind of inclusivity, that would presume that you have a relationship with communities to be as a starting point, right? And I just want to just share a problem that came up with one of our partner community-based organizations, where a predominantly white university was seeking a partnership with the group, and they came up with kind of an agreement, you know, cooperative endeavor agreement kind of document, where the first paragraph was the research institute owns all the data, all the information, all the research. And you know, it made you laugh because it's better than getting mad. And so I offered suggestions. They contacted me, said, this doesn't feel right to us. This sounds like a promising project, but we don't want to do it under these terms. And so we worked it out that if the university wants to own data that it produces, then that means that the community also owns its data, which is the history, the knowledge, the guidance that they would be giving to the research, because you have this, it's a give and take, right? Where do you take the water sample? It's going to be where that community person tells you there's a problem for the last 17 years. That's knowledge, that's history, that's value. Who owns that? The community does, not the researcher. So we changed it, and they resisted. And so we just, you know, closed it. That was the end of the conversation. But the fact that they would approach a community that way, and this is like last month, so it's not like I'm talking from 1955 this happened, last month, means that there's just, I think, you know, culture within the institutions also have to change in terms of this relationship building, where there's real respect for community knowledge and history, and that they really should be their priorities, the research should support those priorities, not divert from it. So.
Okay, another question in the chat says, what would you need from researchers that we are not already doing, and what should we be doing differently? And so I'm going to ask Mr. Tracy that one.
You would need the information and the data from all those who may be involved. That's just like with the city of Houston and Harris County. They do not play well together. Sometimes you may have a joint project, but you need the information from both entities. You know, one may be willing to, you know, give and share the data, and the other one may not. So you have to make sure you get the data from all those that would be needed to complete the project. If not, you know, your information may be useless, because if it's a joint project, if one, say for instance, flooding, the city system drains into the county system. The county may have the data they need, but waiting on the data from the city. And if the city doesn't share, then you're stuck between a rock and a hard place, because you won't have all the information you need to address the problem.
Can I just say a few words too on that one, if I may?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. At work that you know, in the Gulf region, folks who are in the hazards field are missing in action, just missing in action. And to the extent that there is research that is helpful, they're not willing to speak up about it, right? So when the media calls, did you mean that this industrial facility is pumping so much water out of the ground that is causing the land to sink? That's what the report says, but you can't get a researcher to come on camera and say it, or go to a city council a meeting and speak on it. So there's a cowardice that's involved. There's a disconnection in relationships. I'd like to see how we could, work to, mend that, fix that. The hazards are enormous and are clear as day, but we play this game in terms of decision-making processes that are really fundamentally undemocratic, where those hazards can be ignored. And I think having people with your level of expertise say you should not ignore this. This is a real problem. This cries out for resolution, or a decision that removes the hazard or prevents the hazard is critical. And right now it's missing in the work.
Dr. Nance, did you want to add anything to that question?
I just wanted to let Monique know that I think she just knocked it out of the park. She hit the nail on the head. That's exactly, I wish I could have said it as well as she did. Thank you, Monique.
Before we go to the next question, one of the things that, as I was writing the CAPS book and including in the lesson plans, is it's important to not just get practitioners and researchers' opinions, right? You need to actually go to the community, knock on the door and say, find somebody who's the voice, whether it's a pastor from a church or a community organizer, and actually get their opinions and let them point you in the right direction. Because just going, okay, I got a research project and now I'm going to go in this community and I'm going to do all this research, that's not helping anybody but you write a piece of paper. And so that's not okay. When I am a resident of Geismar, Louisiana, and so I grew up across the street from a chemical plant, right? And I grew up across the street from getting flooded in hurricanes, and we had researchers come in all the time. So the need is to be able to come and ask us what we need so we can continue on. The next question that was in the question and answer box, it says, what principles, policies, values, and ethics should we be becoming aware of to ensure we as hazard emergency practitioners are coming correct in our community engagement efforts and not perpetuating existing power imbalances? And then, are consent agreements necessary between parties? That was a long question.
Well, okay, so there are principles that those of us in environmental justice, that's a field of work, the Jimenez principles and then the environmental justice principles. These are written principles that have been around for decades that those of us in the field of environmental justice adhere to. And I wish I had them as a slide. I could just put them up, but I don't have it right here, but I'm sure that we'll be able to get you those email addresses. Those are existing, and the environmental justice, a lot of it has to do with environmental harms, a lot of pollution, but the hazard, the flood, and the hurricane hazards are also included in that. And so that's why we do need to bring these fields together. And those of you that have not been working in environmental justice don't know about those principles. We need to share those principles with everyone so that we can all be on that page together. Monique, did you want to follow up with anything there?
No, I think you said it beautifully. I'm waiting for the next question.
Okay, I don't see any more questions. Did I miss any? Okay, so we have one from Jason Von Meeting. Do you think that it's important to reframe communities as brave, as brave, strong, creative, and powerful rather than around needy or lacking? Yeah, how about Mr. Tracy takes that one?
Say the question again.
Do you think that it's important to reframe communities as brave, strong, creative, and powerful rather than around needy or lacking?
I think you should include it all. When you talk about a community or any community, there's always good and bad wherever you go. So in order to not miss anything, you should also talk about, what's good, what's bad, what they're lacking, what their needs are, and you should also speak to their strengths as well, because you know there's something about every community that's great. All communities, even deemed bad or lacking, a lot of times in the media, you can go to that same community and find great stuff. You know, you can find great people, you can find great businesses, you know, great energy, great food, whatever, you know. So it's not really bad communities, you know, what we have. So you need to look at the whole ball of wax, not just single out or label it as just one or two things, but the energy, you know, the good and the bad. That's the way I look at it.
Okay, we have another question. We have time probably for 3 more questions. So this question is a little long too. It says, my question is about the international dimension for MOSA, for example, is a corporation headquartered in Taiwan of the Environmental Justice Challenge. What examples of international collaboration have panelists seen that have been helpful or effective, and what should be avoided? How can activists and researchers in other places support the work done by those in frontline communities? Dr. Nance just released a paper on that. You want to talk about that, Dr. Nance?
You know what, I was reading the chat and somebody was asking about international, and so I couldn't hear what you were saying. What were you saying?
Okay, so
is that the international question?
Yeah, that's what examples of international collaboration have panelists seen that have been helpful or effective, and what should be avoided? And then also, how can activists and researchers in other places support the work done by those in frontline communities?
So Joy and I just actually literally last month had a paper come out about the international aspect of environmental justice and the companies that are international companies, the transnational corporations like Formosa and many other ones, and how they actually come up with strategies where they're either using international sites as well as sites in the United States, either the same or some kind of a corresponding tactic, so that they're actually creating environmental harms to both populations. We talk about that in a number of instances in the paper, and also how the Mossville community, and Monique is very aware more than I am on this because she was leading it, used the international human rights law to try to stop that one of those practices in their community. And so there are all kinds of lessons to be learned. One of the problems is that the human rights approach, which is probably going to be the role of the future, the approach to be, you know, going ahead to the future as being an approach that more and more communities start to use until they break through. Other international efforts. I know I didn't answer all the question because I've forgotten the rest of the question, but I'm going to stop.
Monique, do you want to follow up on that question?
Sure. So in terms, I can tell you some community-led research that was done internationally, and Dr. Nance mentioned the Mossville community, and I'll share a couple of stories there. Mossville residents are organizing themselves as Mossville Environmental Action Now, and through their work and connections in the environmental justice movement, we're able to make connections with other environmental justice advocates in South Africa. And that relationship that was developed through the years proved really important when a South African based company was planning to build some enormous gas production facilities in Mossville. And one of the things that the Mossville Environmental Action Now did was to have an exchange so that South African residents and communities of Sasolburg and Durban could come to Mossville, and Mossville residents could go there. That exchange proved really important in terms of understanding how people were fighting for their communities, what those environmental hazards looked like, and how they showed up in the lives of residents, how it was different, how it was the same, and what that and being able to use that information in ways that had made the company to have to account for its human rights record in South Africa when it was trying to ding the bell and celebrate. They had a legal obligation about their record of human rights abuse in South Africa. And so that's one. The other piece is looking at the ways in which you can connect with people in hazards field outside of the United States. There was some years ago, I think in the early 2000s, that I remember observing a European conference on risk management planning. And boy, was it different than what passes for risk management planning in the United States. And at that, you've got the risk management, executives at Shell and Rotterdam and all these companies from around Europe, France, right, that had this, Italy, where the Seveso 2 directive came out of because of this chlorine plant that had an accident and engulfed people living in a nearby housing with deaths, right, being among the serious consequences of that accident. And so coming up with this risk management plan, leading to this idea that there should be a required distance between industrial operations that would extend in terms of greater distance between that and residential and educational facilities, like for children. And this algorithm, so if it's industrial to light industrial, there's an appreciable difference. And depending on that other land use, again, going the home and residential use being the largest distance. And one of the things that was really amazing about that conference was that you had these risk managers from Shell to say 1/3 of a mile, the equivalent in kilometers, was too close, was dangerously close. And in the United States, Shell operated across a 1-lane road from Black residents with a flammable pipeline painted in red going along the length of that boundary street. So so being able to connect with others, I think, is extremely important in terms of just expanding what's possible, and also getting in touch with folks who kind of come at it with cultures and legal systems that are more embrace human rights as a point of how you lead on things like environmental protection, where the two are married. So I'll just shut up after that.
It's also possible to hold plants, or at least to bring up the fact that the very same plant in this location that is somehow unable to meet standards is meeting them in another place. So it's not that it can't be done. It's just that they have to be held to that standard.
And insisting on it. I mean, it came with such passion that 1/3 of a mile is entirely too close. And they're discussing a situation that's in Europe, like that situation, that sighting is dangerous. It's like, okay, can we show you what's going on here in the United States?
But to add to that, what Monique said and Dr. Nance here recently in Houston, I'll give you a better example. The Manchester community, Valero is across the fence. And just now, the mayor and elected officials just had a media event out there because Valero gave money to rebuild the park that's over the fence. Put up, Valero bought new playground equipment, the grounds, swing sets, and all of that, but they're polluting across the chain link fence. And
So
they don't see a problem with that.
Well, hold on, but let's open it up for this this conversation, Tracy. Are there any Texas-based folks in the hazards field in this meeting that can begin looking into that? Is that is that something folks in this meeting would be interested in taking part in?
Well, Manchester, for years and years, decades, has been deemed one of the worst communities of air pollution from the industry around the Port of Houston. It's been known for years and decades. And, it's a Hispanic community. Actually, y'all may remember when y'all came to Houston, we did the tour in the van.
Sure.
That's where we went, right over the Ship Channel Bridge, that community right there. And so it's not known to be a problem with Valero and the chemical plants, but this is what they'll do. They'll backdoor you and give you a few on this side to make the publicity look good, the media look good. The mayor, they partnering with us. They, gonna do 50-50, on a project. But look at what they're doing, the overall big picture. They polluted the whole community.
Well,
and so the
going
key
once,
is,
going twice. Are there any participants from Texas in the meeting? I don't know.
From the media clip, I saw some of the neighbors.
No.
Some
I mean,
of the
in this Zoom conference room right now. I'm trying to
I don't
make the
know.
connection that
Oh,
Tracy
okay.
just out in a perfect situation where how hazards get to be ignored, and the need for people with expertise in that field to be able to speak out on this and do it in collaboration and support of communities. So, all right. So Lori said there's tons of Texans in the meeting. Okay. Are any of y'all working on Valero and the Houston Ship Channel and Manchester community? Because there's a need.
So these are the wicked problems that if you ignore, you can have a great career and always get funded and always say you've succeeded. But there are a set of wicked problems that are still there. They can be ignored, or they can be, you can decide it's a commitment. It's a career commitment. And that's what Monique is getting at. There needs to be a higher percentage of people from the hazards field who are committed to the justice side of the issues, because it is the wicked problem.
Can't hear you, Joy.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, there we go. Sorry. This whole Zoom and mute thing doesn't work for me. But anyways, I just want to thank the panelists for joining us today. We are about to go to the closing session to hear Lori, but we want to thank you again and thank you for all of the great questions that we had. So you guys can move over to the closing.